India was always like this talk, India is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. It's been a myth or elusive. And I keep hearing, yes, things are getting better, but what's your perspective of, is India, the startup ecosystem, is it a myth or is it a reality?
Is it all hype?
Is it all hype, or is there a lot of, teeth behind it?
So when we moved 11 years ago, it was going to be easy. The India mobile leapfrog was inevitable, and hundreds of millions of people moving onto the mobile. Internet usage was going up very, very, at almost US levels. It was a young demographic country. The reality is when you peel the onion and you actually looked at the numbers, they were quite superficial.
Yeah.
The mobile penetration and adoption was all feature phones, which were actually very difficult to scale, very smart services. The internet usage actually was also quite superficial. It was really just people getting used to downloading ringtones, that simplistic. And I think most importantly, the consumers themselves were at a very nascent stage in terms of how comfortable they were with using this type of technology. And on the other side of things, the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the funding ecosystem were also quite immature.
Yeah.
We didn't have battle-tested entrepreneurs and well-tested funders who actually really, quite frankly, knew what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And so the result was, honestly, 7 years of nothing.
Yeah.
And so from 2005 to 2012, all that hype was really, truly hype.
Yeah.
Now,
but let me ask you, so you come from US, you're here, you thought, oh, I'm going to go, this is going to happen. And it's not quite there. But what made you stick around for those 7 years? I mean, why didn't you say after 2 years, done?
The reason we moved from the Bay Area was just something innate that made me want to create something big. And just as an aside, when I was looking at the Bay Area, and this was 2004, 2005, now Google had IPO'd and Facebook was still to come, but the ecosystem looked really, really boring to me. It was kind of niches of niches. And I remember sitting with my wife watching a Tom Friedman special of all things about a company called Office Tiger. And India just looked like a blue ocean. And it looked like, if you could go to India back then, it'd be like showing up in the Bay Area in 1985. And who wouldn't want to be in the Bay Area in 1985? Mm-hmm. Of course, it was quite arrogant to think that you could come and do it. But, Office Tiger was an outsourcing successful company started by two, quite frankly, white guys from New York.
Yeah.
Why couldn't I come and start the next Amazon or the next HP or something like that? And, you learned a hard lesson in the first 5 or 6 years. But getting back to the first question, something started looking very different in 2012. The mobile penetration had moved from feature to smart, which was imminently much more scalable in terms of what you could do, number one. And there was a commonality of different technologies, as Brock was talking about, AWS and Android and things like that. Number two, consumers were truly very sophisticated and getting more sophisticated about what they could do. The entrepreneurial ecosystem had now gone through one phase of failure, which is good. And the funders had gone through one phase of failure. So you had battle-tested entrepreneurs who, if you were willing to stick around, there was something gritty about you. And I think it wasn't a coincidence. For those of you who are even tangentially familiar with what is happening in India now, starting in 2015, you started to see massive old-school sectors turn on their head one by one. In 2012, companies like Flipkart, the Amazon of India, started coming up. Started by two guys from Amazon 2 years out of school, and they started Flipkart, and it became the dominant e-commerce company. And e-commerce has fundamentally changed how people actually shop.
And they also put in their time. It was not like it happened overnight, but they also put in their time, and it just came up at that time.
Whether it's Flipkart, underlying that is it's not just about turning on a website. The wonderful thing about India for entrepreneurs is there is a highly complex set of things you need to do in probably all emerging markets that are way beyond just the core technology. If you put up a website, how in the world are you going to get that book from Mumbai to a village in a certain window within 3 days? In the US, you give it to the postal service and it shows up. That's not how it works in India. So Flipkart had to become one of the most complex logistics companies in the world, actually. 2014, the rise of taxis. So transportation, an unbelievably old and corrupt industry, was turned on its head by a kid who had just graduated from school. Ola is the Uber of India. But again, these are not XX of India stories. While Flipkart had to be very good at logistics, Ola had to be very good at financing. Uber is based on you and I having cars. Drivers in India don't have cars. So they had to be very forward-looking on actually securing loans for cars. So they became a financing company.
Yeah.
So you saw these industries turn on their heads. And what was wonderful, Lakshmi, is that these are real entrepreneurs, kids, not family businesses, which is the way that country had worked for decades. Yeah. Number two, there was real scale that was happening and real transformation that was happening, which was completely different than what we were seeing, I was seeing in 2005 and 2006, and you were seeing adoption numbers that were massive. And so, that's when you started seeing things happening, and you started seeing industries turn on their head, and real startups turning the script and becoming the market leaders, bang, bang, bang.
And also, I think it's interesting, as you were talking about, in developing the ecosystem, some new types of companies came, like GharPay was one of the companies that's done by our Ink fellow. Yeah. And their model was about collecting cash on delivery. That was their business. And it became very successful. And the other thing is, for example, Ekta Kapoor, she's very famous for doing this Saas Bahu series. Yeah. But what made her famous was that she started, she would hire all these young actors and actresses who weren't well known and find them loans to buy apartments, get them insurance, so create a whole ecosystem for them. So I think it's interesting that you're saying that in every industry, I think people had to do not only their core product, but a whole bunch of ancillary products to move things forward. Now, let's come specifically to FinTech. So, technology has always been part of financial institutions, but at the same time, there's an explosion of companies in the FinTech area. So tell me what's happening in that area specifically.
Yeah, so, we talked about commerce, we talked about transportation. What's happening now in FinTech, that is going to be the next sector that actually, in a big way, transforms, and you are going to see exactly the same thing we talked about. I think it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. It's why we stuck around and why we started EasyTap. We are probably in year 2 of a 4-year window where mobile technology and connected services are going to transform this country in a massive way. The 3 stages. Year 1, you see consumer adoption increase. I can share some numbers in a second. Number 2, look, a financial transaction has 2 parties. You've got a consumer, but you got to transact with usually a business. What's happening now, companies like us are bringing merchants onto the grid. So that's year 2. And so this ramp up from zero, nothing, to something massive is happening as we speak. The real fun is going to start next year and the year after, when you have all of these connected sides on both sides of the network interacting over the cloud. Now you can do amazing, amazing things. I call it almost the Uberization of commerce is going to happen. So first we got to get the infrastructure up and penetrate. The next thing we need to do is actually then these things can start doing some magic, and I can give you some examples. Here's some numbers.
Yeah.
In 2015, that's when the consumer jump happened, and this is at a scale, quite frankly, that the US has never seen before, and it's going to keep growing. We opened up 200 million bank accounts in 1 year. In terms of perspective, that's basically the number of households in America. And this is push from the government. When the new prime minister came in, this was one of the initiatives. Number 2, we have just hit 1 billion people who have been identified and brought onto the electronic grid as part of the Universal ID project of India. It's the largest technology project in the world. In India, 1 billion people with just a fingerprint or an iris scan can be identified correctly. This is way more sophisticated than the US. We have 630 million cards issued. 630 million cards. People think that India is not digitized. It is digitized. We just now have to unleash that power. New innovation, things like mobile wallets. Now, people may be familiar with Apple Pay and Google Pay. Take out your mobile phone, store some money on it, leave your wallet at home. Now, these technologies are very visible in Western countries, but they're actually very, very minimal in terms of the usage. In India, mobile wallet companies have gone from zero, literally zero at the beginning of 2015, to 150 million plus mobile wallets. Yeah. This type of scale is happening, and it's massive.
And also the numbers that you talked about, the billion, something like WhatsApp took 7 years to hit billion users. And the things we hear about took 5 to 7 years, whereas the UID is going to hit that literally in less than 2 years.
It's already hit it, and it's hit it faster than any other service in the world. WhatsApp, I think, took 5.8 years.
Yeah.
UID took 5.3 years. So that's the scale of what's happening in India right now.
So tell me a little bit about what are some of the new models that are evolving? Because one of the things is, as you talked about, here is Flipkart, the Amazon of India, and here is something, the Uber of India, etc. And to some extent, you're right that even if it is something of India, you need to build your own network. But are there some things that are evolving that are just turning the models on its head?
Yeah.
So whereas there could be some innovation that's coming here at a pace that nobody has ever imagined.
Yeah, and so there's two things happening in parallel. One of the wonderful things, it's not one of the wonderful, the only wonderful thing about being, quite frankly, a laggard in terms of infrastructure development is that you've got no legacy.
Yeah.
You've got no legacy bias. You have no lobbyists or billion-dollar publicly traded companies lobbying to make sure that progress doesn't happen. So you can actually have a government that says, well, financial inclusion is important and we need to scale it. We'll let the private sector, through good policy and innovation, scale on one side, which is happening. But what would the perfect system be? And let's invest in it. And that's actually what happened. So on one side, you've got well-funded companies. You've got kind of this real platform of innovation and consumer adoption happening. And a lot of interconnected apps are going to change business, the way people interact. But on the other side, the Indian government, UID is one component of what's called the India Stack. And you can Google and see lots of talks by people like Nandan Nilekani who talk eloquently about it. What the India Stack is a set of open services that the government has done, and they've taken key components that make up the real basis of any system. Can I identify who you are? Can I transfer money seamlessly from one person to another? Can I actually create a document that's validated and replicated and make it digital? With a single fingerprint or a mobile-driven authentication, can I assume that you've given me legitimate acceptance to offer you a service?
Right.
If you look at the US or Singapore or other places, a lot of these things are there and are core components to how the system works, but they're still manual and inefficient. Well, the Indian government said, we're going to open it up. In fact, we're going to design it from scratch with the brightest software people that we can.
Yeah.
Not only are we going to make it way more efficient, we're going to open it up for free to anybody. Now, here's the implication. The implication is that when you have these services in a mobile world, you can actually replicate a bank very, very quickly. So I can use a service to identify a person and make sure that they are there. I can actually transfer money at zero cost.
Yeah.
I can open it up, and two kids could build an application that does all of this. There's interesting technologies like blockchain that might actually evolve into kind of an on-demand risk management that complements all of this stuff. And now you've got a world where, let's use a couple names, Apple, Google, Facebook. They could be your bank. Now, they can replicate your technology, and they can do it faster than you think. This could happen in less than a year.
And also, I mean, even whether it's Indian companies, I mean, it could be a Samsung, could be an Infosys or a Tech Mahindra. I mean, anybody can become the Tatas or the Birlas. Anyone can open a bank.
It's open and available and free, number one. Yeah. So the technology is no longer a siloed barrier to entry. It can be replicated. Number two, you've got actually a user experience, in which case software is much better.
Yeah.
So you can create the same a better user experience, a more convenient user experience with no physical assets required, and actually be able to scale it much, much faster. Number three, let's use some of the companies I just named. They probably have a better engagement with the consumers who are the customers of a retail bank than the bank does. Number four, unlike banks that may have become inefficient over time, these are really well-oiled machines. They're highly competitive. And now imagine going head-to-head in battle where you've got no barrier to entry, no competitive advantage. They can do exactly what you can do. They can do it better with no infrastructure on their balance sheet. If I was the CEO of a major retail bank, I would be scared right now. And let's be clear. Unlike the domestic and transportation story we talked about in India, which are very domestic in terms of the, of the IP, this is a horizontal play. And while India is the test case for it, this can be exported very, very easily. In fact, it should be exported very, very easily. This is happening now. This can be replicated in a couple years. the bank that your parents and I grew up with could be commoditized or out of business in 5 years. That's the impact of what's happening in India. So it's not just are there interesting companies and interesting models. This has repercussions to any financial city, institution around the world.
Now, we've talked about it took a while to get there. It was a hype 7 years ago. It's a reality literally in the last 2 years. But certain things have come together to make it happen. Whether it is the Reserve Bank of India rules or whether it's the entrepreneurs or the ecosystem. What are 2 or the 3 major things that you think are responsible for this kind of an explosion?
We're lucky, and I'll go back. This is once in a generation window because 4 or 5 things that rarely come together have happened. First of all, you've had a massive demographic that's kind of grown up all in one shot, number one. Number two,
it's grown up in native mobile.
And native mobile, correct.
Yeah.
Number two, from a technology platform point of view, open systems, standard systems, high speed, all of that infrastructure is there. So that's happened. Number 3, you've got a government that's very, very progressive and pushing this. So once the government said financial inclusion is important, not only are we going to improve with progressive policy, we're also going to invest on the technology side, and we're going to mandate that we want massive numbers to be hit. The government pushed it. So you have a Reserve Bank of India that's both really conservative when it comes to security and really progressive when it comes to innovation, allowing non-banking entities to get banking licenses. Telecoms have licenses. Digital wallet companies have banking licenses. Anybody can be a bank if you qualify. So they've opened up banking, they've opened up technology, and most importantly, like I said, you have a really robust and well-tested entrepreneurial ecosystem now that has funding, and the numbers are backing up, and VC money has come in, and smart VC money has come in, and I think you're going to see some massive things come out of that country.
So now you've been in India for 11 years, from US. You think, is this your home? What do your parents feel about it? They're still in America, right?
When we moved, it wasn't easy. I grew up, obviously, as you can all tell, from the US. My parents are unbelievably shocked that they immigrated from West Bengal, and now I'm back in India. It's crazy to them. But when we were when my wife and I were thinking about this, we said, what was the worst that could happen? First of all, it'll be easy, right? It'll be a couple of years. Number 2, what's the worst? We'll come in for 2 years, we'll have great Asian experience, entrepreneurial experience, and go back. Well, actually 2 years has become 11 years.
11, yeah.
2 kids, 2 startups, 3 product launches, and it's home. And it's home because, you can make a home anywhere. I think the advice I give people from the US when they think about India, which has become very hot, it's apples and oranges. If you start comparing San Francisco and Bangalore, you're going to go crazy. But you got to love what's great about it. And the most important thing about Bangalore and India, and I think Asia in general, is if you've got a 15-year window, going back to why we came, I really believe this is the Bay Area in 1985. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes 15, 20 things to get a business up and running. But I think we're at that one of these windows where you're going to look back and just see a massive set of globally dominant and globally important companies coming out of one city over the next 5 to 6 years.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, Bobby. Great.